Kaushik Srinivasan, co-founder and whole-time director at eMudhra, who is now joining us. Mr. Srinivasan, good afternoon. Ashesha this side, and thank you for joining us today. And let's start with the enterprise solutions segment, because that now accounts for 65% of your total revenue, and that segment grew at a solid 50% on a year-on-year basis. What led to this kind of exceptional growth that you've reported, which ultimately aided the consolidated revenue growth that we saw in the quarter?
Yeah, good afternoon, Ashesha. So enterprise solutions, as you know, we've been focusing more on product-led growth, both in India and overseas markets. So part of that contribution of that growth also came from our European subsidiary, Cryptas, which also kind of grew. And apart from that, our global markets kind of grew. And more so in India, we've seen quite a demand for our products cutting across the cybersecurity segment. And that's why you kind of see that overall number of 50% growth in the solutions business.
Hi, Mr. Srinivasan. Meryl D'Souza here, also joining in. I want to understand if this 50% growth is a sustainable level for you in the first quarter, and what are your where do you see this tapering off or maybe going into the full year FY27?
Yeah, so for the full year, we had given an overall revenue guidance of about 18 odd percent, 18 to 20%. But with the sort of focus on product-led growth. So therefore, the bottom line, we had at least, sort of indicated that we'll work towards a 2x growth in PAT over the next 3 years. So, but if you break up the segments of the growth, there are 3 segments of business that we operate. One is the trust services, which generally has a nominal growth of about 8 to 10%. And then the services business, which is growing in line with industry. So if you account for the remaining, essentially the product-led growth is probably at a 25 to 30% clip. And that's the trajectory that we kind of want to maintain over the short to medium term.
Mr. Srinivasan, you are telling us that 18% organic revenue growth and 25 to 30% PAT growth guidance continues to remain intact. Am I getting it right?
That is correct. Yeah, we're working towards that.
Okay, and let's also talk about international business. How is that growing? Because overseas revenue also contributes about 60 to 65% of your total revenue now. How is the growth in US, Europe and African region been in the last quarter? And what is the trajectory looking like going forward?
Yeah, so across markets now, we have a fairly diversified base. And if you see, different trends are driving the growth in different markets. For instance, in US and Europe, there is a strong push towards, cybersecurity. Mostly driven by 2, 3 broader themes. One is this whole shift towards quantum computing and therefore the need to secure yourselves. 2 is this new era of AI and agentic AI and how do you sort of drive security in that context. And 3 is general usage of more stronger sort of authentication access management solutions in those markets. And that is broadly driving the growth in US and kind of European markets. When it comes to Africa, Middle East and some of the emerging frontier markets, many of them are deploying this whole digital public infrastructure, which India obviously has pioneered over the last several years. And we've been an integral part of that sort of journey. And those are the opportunities that we are seeing in many of these kind of Middle East, African, and more of these emerging markets, where it's more ID, authentication, ability to go paperless, ability to go presenceless, to drive completely digital transactions is where we are seeing a broad-based growth. But one of the consequences of that is obviously also, the need for stronger cybersecurity, because as you go more and more digital, the threats around cyber breaches, data breaches kind of increase. And the same solutions that we sell, in many of the other markets are also applicable as many of these countries transition towards a fully digital way of doing business.
Got it, Mr. Srinivasan. You'd also seen Middle East order delays due to geopolitical issues. I want to understand what's the on-ground situation from this right now and what sort of impact are you seeing?
The on-ground situation is improving because many of the things, as you know, are slowly returning back to normalcy. So decision cycles that were slightly delayed in the last quarter are now starting to see a bit of normalization. Although it has not fully come back to full normalcy, but I think we expect that to, sort of become more steady in the next 1 or 2 quarters.
Srinivasan, you gave organic growth target of about 18% for FY27, but what about beyond FY27? If you have done some back of the envelope working, which you can help us with in FY28 and 29, what kind of revenue growth could we foresee?
No, I'll put it this way. As we had guided earlier, we are working towards more of profitability growth target of 2x over the next 3 years, which we had sort of indicated. And more a product-led sort of growth so that there is higher margins flowing through. This would probably mean, sort of an organic growth rate of about that same 15 to 18% on an overall company basis. Of course, if our other lines of business slightly grow faster, maybe we could grow a little more faster, but that's the overall trajectory that we are aiming for in the next 2, 3 years.
Okay, got that. We also believe that eMudhra is embedding Agentic AI across its platforms. So how big of an opportunity will this AI-driven cybersecurity wave demand be for you?
Yeah, AI is a structural tailwind for a company like eMudhra, because as agents kind of get used more and more, there are 2, 3 problem statements from a cybersecurity standpoint that need to get solved. One is these agents need an identity so that they can communicate securely. Two, if tomorrow agents start taking decisions on behalf of systems or humans, then there is an element of traceability, verifiability, and of course, from a legal standpoint, if enforceability is required, again, more and more usage of digital signatures will continue. So security, the whole traceability aspect, all of these will hopefully, as agentic AI gets adopted across the enterprise fabric, the whole layer of AI trust and governance probably becomes more and more critical, which is where a company like us probably has a greater role to play.
Okay, at the end of last quarter, Mr. Srinivasan, you had also told your investors that the company is open to small AI cybersecurity acquisitions, especially in the US market. Anything on the anvil, anything that is in the works that you can share the details with us?
Nothing as of now. The space continues to evolve. As you know, the trends are changing pretty rapidly with technology. So we are also continuously evaluating, companies, but nothing immediately.
All right, no immediate impact on that front. And tell us about your full year guidance. In fact, in terms of this AI thing, you had at the last quarter said that, to reiterate, the small AI cybersecurity acquisitions, what's your outlook on that front? What areas will the acquisitions be focused on, if you can tell us something about that as well?
A lot of work going on in a couple of areas. One is generally in the technology space. One is obviously how do you secure AI agents, number one. Number two, how do you ensure that the right agent has access to the right information? So if you're trying to pull invoices, do you have the authority, the policy, the access? So these are all spaces that are quite interesting for our existing platforms. If there are opportunities from a bolt-on standpoint where we can strengthen the capability to superior distinguish our product as compared to competition. So that is probably the area that we will actively focus on. And two is, the post-quantum cryptography to protect yourself from, risks of quantum computers. Also, there is a lot of work going on. We have also done a lot of R&D. So the intersection of this kind of continues to present interesting opportunities, right? So that is where I think our focus is. If there is any acquisition that presents an interesting bolt-on opportunity, we will look at it. Broadly on the guidance, as I had indicated, an overall growth of about 18% is what we're looking at, but probably a slight improvement in the margin and therefore better profitability.
Okay, so that's the outlook not only for the next year, but for the coming years as well, especially with respect to your international business. Mr. Srinivasan, thank you so much for taking your time out and joining us here on ET Now.
Thank you, Ashish.